Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast. And northern Israel is on fire yet again. 80 rockets fired today into northern Israel from Lebanon, courtesy of the Iran-backed terror army Hezbollah. And we've been saying this.
Description, I wear Venice.
Apologies for that. Apologies also for being a bit late. We're at a very important meeting about the channel, actually. We've got some exciting things happening here on the Watchman channel. But look, we've been saying this for a while. Lebanon, the border with Israel on fire. But today, folks, 80 projectiles, rockets, missiles launched at Israel. And we have new numbers on Hezbollah's capabilities. How much damage exactly can Hezbollah do in that coming great northern war with Israel? And obviously, does that great northern war have prophetic implications? We're going to break all of this down. Well, let's start with the big breaking news. It wasn't just a Hezbollah barrage today. Israel struck and struck deep inside of Lebanon, Hezbollah's home base. Here's some immediate details for you just from the Times of Israel, reading this right off my phone. Israel says it hit significant Hezbollah site deep in Lebanon. 50 rockets were fired at the Golan Heights in response, and that quickly grew to 80 rockets, as I said at the top. But here we go, folks. 3 Hezbollah members killed in this Israeli attack in the Hermel district. Israel says this strike today, a big one, and wow, just footage of massive explosion there in Lebanon, courtesy of Israeli fighter jets. It was a response to a drone, an Israeli drone, that Hezbollah downed in Lebanon on Monday. And look, a drone that was intercepted near Haifa. Hezbollah's been upping the game, so to speak, right? Getting more daring with their rocket, missile, and drone strikes and launches at all points throughout northern Israel. And Haifa, look, folks, is the 3rd largest city in Israel. So this is kind of upping the game in all the wrong ways for Hezbollah, so Israel had to respond. Okay, more details on today. We'll get to the 80 rockets, more on that, and northern Israel on fire and setting the Golan on fire. And northern Israel last week, if you recall, if you watch the newscast, was literally on fire. We had 1,000 acres of land burned last week, scorched, courtesy of these Hezbollah attacks. And by the way, folks, if you miss any of our videos, and we're posting here practically every day, even on the weekends, we're coming to you for such a time as this. Simply subscribe. Go to the subscribe button here, and we want to get this message out, right? If you subscribe, 2 things. Number 1, you'll get this content on a daily basis. Every time a new video is released, you will get it. You'll get a notification. Just click the notification bell. And number 2, it helps to drive this message out around the world, not just in the United States where I'm sitting, not just in the West, around the world, quite literally right now in the chat. We have people from every continent practically. I like to say even there's some penguins in Antarctica on their phones right now joining on the stream. But all seriousness, we want to get this message far and wide, not for our glory, but for the glory of God, and to get the truth out in a time where it is so badly needed. And that's an understatement, right? Where good is called evil and evil is called good. We're trying to break through the clutter with biblical truth. This is current events, news from a biblical Christian perspective, unapologetically. So when you subscribe, YouTube sends it out to more folks who can get the message of truth. So let's move on here. Israeli fighter jets struck what Israel's military described as a significant Hezbollah compound deep in Lebanon overnight, early Tuesday morning, after, again, Hezbollah downed an Israeli drone. The IDF said the airstrikes targeted a site in the Baalbek region that belonged to Hezbollah's Unit 4400. You might say Unit 44 what? Well, Unit 4400 is really the elite, one of the elite units in Hezbollah. They are tasked with logistical force buildup, very important, meaning this unit of Hezbollah, which Israel targeted, delivers weaponry to Lebanon and within the country. Meaning, okay, Unit 4400, they're the point people on those weapon shipments that are coming from Iran. They're transiting through Syria into the hands of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Why do you think Iran, and Hezbollah by extension, have invested so much in Syria ever since 2011, really? since that Syrian civil war broke out. In the early days, the first few years of the Syrian civil war, Iran went all in and Hezbollah went all in. They got involved in Syria because they were petrified that Bashar al-Assad, who's a client of Iran, they were petrified that he would be toppled and that a new regime hostile to Iran would come to power in Syria. Why is that so problematic? Because Syria, in terms of Iran's overarching goals and strategies in the region, Syria is absolutely a must for the Iranian regime. Without Syria, number one, they won't have that transit point to get the weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon next door. And number two, they'd have one less forward base from which to launch attacks against Israel. Remember, Syria shares a border with Israel. And number three, that means there would be one less ring on that Iranian ring of fire, which surrounds Israel on all sides. And one crucial ring, obviously, Lebanon. So let's read more. Lebanese media reported that the Israeli strikes took place in the Hermel district, again, near Baalbek in northeastern Lebanon. Folks, that's deeper than Israel usually strikes. It's not southern Lebanon, Hezbollah's main power base. We're talking northeastern Lebanon. 3 Hezbollah members killed by 9 Israeli missile strikes that targeted a convoy of tankers and a building in a village in Hermel on the border with Syria. Hezbollah admitted that 3 members on their Telegram channel, and by the way, if you like Telegram, check out our good buddy Amir Sarfati of Behold Israel, who has an amazing Telegram channel. If you're going to Telegram, look at Amir's channel, not Hezbollah's. Needless to say, Hezbollah says 3 members killed. Key point here. They were killed, quote, on the road to Jerusalem. Every time a Hezbollah member is killed, that's what they say. They were killed on the road to Jerusalem. What does that mean? It means that Jerusalem looms large in the eyes of the Iranian ring of fire, just as the Bible said it would. The book of Zechariah, chapter 12, said a day is coming when Jerusalem, not only for jihadists backed by Iran and for Iran itself, but for all peoples. Jerusalem, think of the UN resolutions over the past few years, saying that Jerusalem has no ties to the land of Israel or the Jewish people. A day is coming, Zechariah says, where Jerusalem will become like a burdensome stone for all peoples. And though all peoples come against it, anyone who comes against it will be cut to pieces. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the gist of what Zechariah 12 says. So just so you know, it's no surprise that Hezbollah is talking incessantly about Jerusalem, as is Hamas, as is Iran. Look, Hezbollah, with their death announcements for Hezbollah fighters, again, are saying he was killed on the road to Jerusalem. The ultimate goal, the ultimate prize is Jerusalem, or as they would call it, Al-Quds. So don't forget that. The centrality of Jerusalem, the ancient and ancestral capital of Israel and the Jewish people, Jerusalem, folks, will loom larger and larger in the days to come. Mark my words. It's the dividing line as we have this pressure ramping up, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, this pressure ramping up for Israel to agree to a Palestinian state with Jerusalem, or at half at least, eastern Jerusalem as its capital. You're going to hear more and more. Jerusalem, more and more, will capture the world's attention. And when Jesus returns, he's going to lay down his foot on the Mount of Olives, which is not in Berlin, Washington, Tokyo, or London. It's in Jerusalem. He will rule and reign from Jerusalem. So yeah, Jerusalem is kind of a big deal when it comes to God's prophetic time clock and plan. Okay, so on the road to Jerusalem, there you go with Hezbollah. The attack may have, this Israeli attack overnight in Lebanon, just may have marked the deepest IDF strikes in Lebanon since October 8th. Why is October 8th significant? You've heard a lot about October 7th, obviously the Hamas massacre against Israel. But on October 8th, one day later, that's when Hezbollah began its onslaught against Israel. Remember that? The day after October 7th, Hezbollah threw its hat in the ring and started launching rockets and missiles at Israel. Key point here. Israel didn't start things with Hamas on October 7th, and Israel didn't start things with Hezbollah on October 8th. In both cases, Israel was unilaterally attacked by these terrorist organizations. Key point. But then when Israel responds and moves to defend itself and crush the attackers who are a demonic death cult, Israel is the target of the world's ire and the world's anguish and its gnashing of teeth. Hey, by the way, speaking, and we'll move on to Hezbollah a little bit more in a second, speaking of the world's ire and the world's animosity and accusatory tone towards Israel, none more so than in Europe, right? And the European Union. Well, we've got European viewers, many. How about the elections over the weekend? The European parliamentary elections. Look, the European Parliament, this took place in 27 countries, all the EU members, and the European Parliament is essentially the legislative body for the EU, which helps kind of set the direction for the continent of Europe. Well, guess what? It had been dominated mostly by left-wing types, maybe some centrists, socialist types, the Greens in Europe. Well, over the weekend with these elections, it swung pretty sharply to the right. And in Germany, in France, in Belgium, the left-wing ruling governments, or center-left in the case of France, suffered major blows. To the point where Emmanuel Macron in France has now called new elections for the end of this month in France. So, folks, I say all that to say this bears watching, as does the election in July, on the 4th of July, no less, in the UK. Now, it doesn't look as promising, perhaps, for conservatives and the right in the UK, but that's a big one. Then, of course, the big one in November, where I'm sitting right now in the United States, the presidential election. I say all that to say, could the pendulum swing in Europe, which has been, look, we've talked about this, right, here in the newscast, socialist, globalist, secularist, open borders, hostile to Israel, with a very skeptical eye towards the United States, to say the least. Could the pendulum be swinging now in Europe? Are people waking up? They're answering through their votes. Open borders have been a disaster for Europe and have changed the very character of countries, cities, towns. France is 10% Islamic. Britain's over 6% Islamic. Sweden is over 8% Islamic. The list goes on. And it's been culture clash after culture clash with a refusal to assimilate. And now we're at kind of crisis point. We've been in Europe. Is that pendulum going to swing? And will American voters, last thing here, will American voters reject socialism, radical secularism, open borders, and all the rest in November? I mean, folks, the next 5 months, elections in Europe, now France on a micro level having elections in late June, which could seal the fate of Emmanuel Macron and his government. He could be out. Britain in July will elect either Rishi Sunak remains prime minister or there's a new prime minister. America in November, and Canada next year as well. Could Trudeau be voted out? So, folks, these could be geopolitical earthquakes across the Western world. And it could have major bearing, of course, on Israel. Could we have staunchly pro-Israel governments rise who don't equivocate and who don't cave to world pressure and throw in their lot at the UN and vote along with the rest of the anti-Israel mob at the UN in the General Assembly against Israel, which we've seen the UK do and others? Or do we have staunch friends of Israel who have backbone and who stand with Israel openly and proudly, who reject anti-Semitism, who stand against it, who crack down on it in their countries, and who also defend Judeo-Christian Western civilization? I'm praying for that kind of turn, and it will have profound implications for the Middle East, no doubt. And Hezbollah responds, as we're talking Hezbollah, responds to the major Israeli strike deep in Lebanon today with a barrage of its own. Here's some more details there. 80 folks? 80 projectiles? Wow. And now they're saying, by the way, at least 5 killed in that strike against Hezbollah in Lebanon. But some more of those projectiles. Let us see. Okay. 50 at the Golan alone, as I mentioned, at the Golan Heights, one of my favorite areas in Israel, but 80 overall. This is not the first time where we've had a massive volley of dozens upon dozens of rockets striking Israel. And I mentioned the wildfires last week that were sparked in northern Israel because of these strikes. And it's all building towards something. I've called it the Great Northern War, where Israel will be forced to face off against Hezbollah, against Iran in the north. It's a question not of if, but when. And that's Israeli military officials, political figures who I interview who tell me exactly that. What do you think? And yesterday on Stakelbeck Tonight, my brand new show on TBN, it's nightly, folks. Every night, Monday through Friday, you can tune in on TBN. 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time with a re-air at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It's called Stakelbeck Tonight. We just launched it. We had our good friend Aaron Cohen, top counterterrorism expert, former Israeli Special Forces operator, who told me, look, Israel may go into Lebanon this summer. They may. They may not. I have a question for you. Do you think it's going to happen? Do you think Israel is getting to that point where they're saying enough is enough? 80 projectiles launched today, 1,000 acres scorched last week. And a key point here, 60,000, perhaps many more, Israelis in the north evacuated from their homes. And they have no clear return date. How long can Israel put up with that? I want your opinion on that. What do you think? Is Israel going to say, does Israel have essentially something up its sleeve where it's going to say enough is enough and they're going in? Or does this all revolve around Gaza? And I'll tell you what I mean there in a minute. And by the way, some major traction, perhaps in the wake of the hostages being rescued, 4 hostages at least over the weekend, some major traction, some movement, it seems, towards a potential ceasefire in Gaza. Hamas now saying they're interested, apparently. I want to talk about that and its bearing on that Hezbollah war. Does it make a war in the north more or less likely if that Gaza ceasefire comes? And I believe personally, folks, way too early for that. The job is not done. There are still some 116 hostages in Hamas's clutches. There's way too many question marks. And, Ronald Reagan, a great American president, once said, when it comes to dealing with the Soviet Union, trust but verify. When it comes to dealing with Hamas, don't trust at all, but verify, verify, verify. I mentioned the North. And before we break down Gaza's implications for the North and the prophetic implications of the North, Isaiah 17, Ezekiel, and is that Northern War and what's happening in Gaza right now, a precursor to larger prophetic events? I believe it is. We'll discuss it in a minute. But those evacuated, the tens of thousands of evacuated Israelis in the north, and by the way, tens of thousands remain evacuated in the south as well along the Gaza border. Would you like to help them? That's a question I've been asked many times in our comments, and that's why we're proud to be sponsored today's live stream, and collaborate, partner with our good friends at Magen David Adom. Folks, I've got some numbers for you. Magen David Adom, if you've been to Israel, you've seen them. You've seen Magen David Adom ambulances everywhere. Why? Magen David Adom is Israel's emergency medical system. Here's the numbers. 35,000 paramedics, EMTs, and first responders. That's Magen David Adom. They answer every emergency medical call in Israel. Every one. So on October 7th, Magen David Adom got the call to come and help. When the wildfire scorched northern Israel last week, courtesy of Hezbollah, Magen David Adom gets the call. When there's a terror attack in the West Bank, which we call Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland, Magen David Adom is on the scene. They are Israel's emergency medical system. These are the first responders. They answer every emergency call. They dispatch every ambulance in Israel. It is SaveLivesIsrael.com. I repeat, SaveLivesIsrael.com to support Magen David Adom. Talk about doing God's work. This is it. There is literally not a better way to stand with and help Israel in its time of greatest need right now. This is the most perilous time for Israel since 1948, bar none. You want to help Israel? You want to fulfill that biblical mandate laid out in Genesis 12:3 to bless the people of Israel? Magen David Adom, I can't think of a better way to do it. They are the hands and feet, folks, who are on the ground. Look, they maintain Israel's blood supply. It's a mostly volunteer force, by the way, yet they are laying their lives on the line. Some more numbers for you. Since October 7th, 30 paramedics and EMTs have been killed in the war against Hamas, 17 ambulances destroyed. Needless to say, Magen David Adom needs your help. It's and Israel needs your help, and you're helping Israel certainly when you stand with Magen David Adom. SaveLivesIsrael.com. That's SaveLivesIsrael.com. I can't recommend them strongly enough, folks, and I'm proud that Magen David Adom is sponsoring today's live stream for such a time as this. Check them out, SaveLivesIsrael.com. Amazing, amazing, literally life-saving work. Talk about prophetic. There you go. Okay, Gaza. Now, Anthony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, kind of doing that whirlwind tour once again throughout the Middle East. He's meeting with Israeli leaders. He's meeting with Arab leaders, and he's pushing a ceasefire. Hamas now giving indications that they are open to listening. They may be interested. Here's the problem. And today, the U.S. National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, talked about this. The problem with this ceasefire potential deal as it's currently construed is that it doesn't seem to demand that Hamas leave power. One of the many problems with it, I should say. Jake Sullivan today said, well, they won't be in power. How do you figure that? How do you figure that Hamas will not remain, and they've been wounded and wounded badly. Hamas is nearing its death throes. Still active, still have fighters, still have rockets, but those rockets have slowed to a trickle, and Hamas's forces have been decimated by Israel in a stunning offensive. But it's kind of stalled a bit in the past few months, as we've documented here in the newscast. But Israel is close, perhaps by the end of this month, according to Israeli officials, of finishing the job in Rafah. After the world wept, howled, and gnashed its teeth for months, literally, and begged Israel, don't go into Rafah, Israel may be close to finishing the job there. And that was the last bastion, right? The last stronghold. 4 Hamas battalions hold up there. We don't know. Are there hostages in Rafah as well? The hostages who were rescued over the weekend were rescued from central Gaza, Nusayrat in central Gaza, which was an area Israel had already conquered, the IDF had already taken control of. Then the problem is, are you playing a game of whack-a-mole, essentially, where the IDF conquers an area, they leave, and then the rats from Hamas go scurrying back to that area. We've seen that a few times. Look, Israel, Al-Shifa Hospital, back in November. Israel controlled it. They left. They had to go back into Al-Shifa Hospital a little while ago and retake control. That is not a situation Israel wants to be in. That's why it makes it even more important to seize control in Rafah, eliminate the tunnel network flowing from Rafah into Egypt next door, and decimate Hamas's last battalions there. But I say all that to say, if Israel leaves right now, look, Hamas is on the ropes. But if you agree to a ceasefire right now, in my view, you leave Hamas alive to fight another day, you're snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Because look, Hamas, in the state they're in right now, and they're in disarray, and Israel has done tremendous damage to Hamas, thank God. But the state they're in right now, clearly weakened. But are they weakened beyond all recognition? Meaning, say Israel temporarily agrees, or I should say prematurely agrees, to a ceasefire. Israeli forces pull out. They pull out of Gaza. Hamas isn't completely smashed. Do we see the rats scurrying back to central Gaza, back to northern Gaza, back to Shifa Hospital, rearing their heads in Rafah, rearing their heads in Khan Yunis? Now, weakened severely, not what they were by a long shot, but still alive. There's still a pulse. I'm not saying they could duplicate October 7th or come close to it tomorrow or next week or the week after, maybe not even this year. But folks, what is the MO of Hamas? 2 ideas here that aren't ideas, they're realities. To give you an idea, I should say. Number 1, look, over the years, Israel has fought since late 2008, early 2009, 6, 7 engagements against Hamas, and those are only the larger engagements. This flares up, and it flares up some more. Hamas takes a licking. They're licking their wounds. Then a year later, they're back to it, firing rockets and coming through tunnels again, to the point they're able to pull off October 7th, an invasion of southern Israel with 1,200 Hamas fighters, followed by the way, by 6,000 Gazan civilians, innocent, I'm sure, Gazan civilians, who also raped and pillaged on the backs of Hezbollah, who led the way. The bloodiest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. After all the lumps Hamas took over the past 15 years, they still were able to carry out October 7th. So say there's still 5,000, 10,000, 15, 20,000 Hamas fighters still alive right now. And Israel leaves, pulls out, agrees to a ceasefire, doesn't finish the job. What makes you think Hamas wouldn't try to attack Israel October 7th style again? After all, Hamas leaders have said as much. Since October 7th, they said, we're going to do this again. We've got the tape. I've showed it on my show, Stakelbeck Tonight. They're saying it. We're quoting them directly. And number two, Hamas's whole rationale for being is to destroy Israel. That's why they exist. To destroy Israel and to establish a global caliphate where one and all live under Sharia law, whether you like it or not. That's where this all ends. Hamas exists to kill, maim, murder, and torture. If it didn't, it wouldn't be Hamas. If that ceased to exist, then they wouldn't be Hamas. Would Hamas take a ceasefire out of sheer desperation right now? Perhaps. But only with the anticipation that they will break the ceasefire when they're strong enough to mount new attacks against Israel. That's how it works. Unless you cripple them, and I mean cripple them, and you conduct a massive denazification of the Gaza Strip. Because Hamas are modern-day Nazis, folks. They're a demonic death cult, and they have succeeded in brainwashing a large portion of the tiny Gaza Strip. That ideology and that Hamas brainwashing, it's going to be a long, hard road to turn that around and flip that switch in people's minds, and more importantly, in their hearts and their spirits in Gaza. What they've lived under with Hamas, and look, many have embraced it. They've embraced the Hamas ideology. That's undeniable. It is undeniable that thousands of civilians streamed into Israel on October 7th. It is undeniable because we've heard from Israeli hostages. It's undeniable that when Israeli hostages were carted in to Gaza, not carted in, dragged into Gaza, that there were massive jubilant celebrations with thousands of Palestinian civilians in the streets, spitting at them, throwing things at them, and cursing them. That's undeniable. There's video of it. So there's a problem in Gaza, for sure, with extreme jihadist radicalism. That's going to have to be dealt with. And look, Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan after World War II, blueprint, or some people have pointed out in the comments, look, you're dealing in Gaza with a religion. Now, Nazism and emperor worship in Japan were de facto religions, really, right? But Islam's been around a whole lot longer than that. So how do you break that? How do you break the jihadist mindset in Gaza? Anyone has suggestions? What you think? Leave some comments here. What do you think comes next with I've called it the Gazan denazification from the Hamas Nazis? Is it possible? Can it be done? Is it too deeply ingrained? What do you think? That's something that's going to have to be dealt with. Hey, quick reminder, by the way, we've got the channel here and we strongly encourage you to subscribe. I mentioned my brand new show, Stakelbeck Tonight. Hey, remember, we also have a second YouTube channel here, our sister channel, the Stakelbeck Tonight channel. At Stakelbeck Tonight, it's at Stakelbeck Tonight. And if you miss any clips from my nightly now, I know it's nightly because I'm a whole lot busier. And I was busy already, but it's good to be busy in God's plan and be doing his work. Stakelbeck Tonight, every night on TBN, clips from the show on the Stakelbeck Tonight channel, right here on YouTube. If you love the content here on our main channel, the Watchman channel, you'll love the Stakelbeck Tonight channel. You get a twofer here with content that you're not seeing on this channel. but Israel, Middle East, prophetic, current events related. I think you'll like it. At Stakelbeck Tonight, give us a subscribe there as well. And remember, premium membership. Click join here. Hey, if you don't join premium, all good. You subscribe here completely free. You're with us every day. Awesome. But if you want to go a little deeper with us, if you're here every day and you want more of that content, you can become a premium member. Real simple. Just click join. You'll get all the details and you get a few cool features, folks. Number one, my weekly podcast. It's called the Stackscast. Yeah, we got a lot going on. We've got 3 legs to what we do. We've got the nightly broadcast TV show on TBN, Stakelbeck Tonight. We've got the YouTube channel here, 2 channels now. We're keeping afloat. And number 3, our weekly podcast, fascinating conversations with fascinating people, personal testimonies, some very big names you will recognize, kind of bearing their souls and really getting in depth on a lot of current events, prophecy, amazing stuff. So you will get the full podcast every week, the video version as a premium member. And plus this Thursday, mark your calendars, for all our premium members, we're doing a special premium live stream. That's this Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. That's June 13th, premium live stream. So we'll do question and answer, Q&A, some really good stuff during the premium stream. You get to know me a little bit better. I get to know you a little bit better. It's a good thing. So that's for our premium members on Thursday. And don't worry, we're still doing our regular live streams and newscasts, mostly every day as well. But for that premium live stream, it's going to be a little more intimate, and there's Q&A, some really good stuff coming there. Okay, to close here, folks, look, your answers on Hezbollah and if that war is coming. Here's my take on how Gaza relates to it, just to close that thought, close the circle. If there's a ceasefire in Gaza, does Hezbollah hold its fire? Because Hezbollah has said all along, and Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader, has said, as long as the war continues in Gaza, we're going to keep the pressure on. Does a ceasefire in Gaza quiet things to the north? Big question. And number 2, the other factor, does a ceasefire in Gaza make it more likely that Israel will strike in the north? Meaning, Israel could say, and they've been saying, we don't want to fight 2 major wars on 2 fronts. I would argue that the north is becoming a major war day by day, more and more. 80 rockets today. So, again, the inevitability of a great northern war. But Israel would rather not be focused on Gaza and Lebanon. They'd like all of their reservists, all of their focus on Lebanon if they're going to wage a war against Hezbollah there. I get it, but a 2-front war is now upon you, and something's going to have to happen if things continue the way they are, certainly by the end of the summer. So does Israel agree to this ceasefire in Gaza? And folks, look, if the hostages aren't all released, if Sinwar is still alive, if there's still thousands of Hamas fighters, then that's way too soon, and it ain't good. But could Israel be thinking, you know what? The more pressing threat, and they're right if that's what they're thinking, is certainly to the north with Hezbollah. We need to deal with Hezbollah. We need to get those 60,000, probably more, evacuated Israelis back home. Let's just tie this thing up in Gaza, end it as best we can, and then we shift our focus to the north. That's another factor here. What do you think? Where do you think this is going to go? We'll talk more about this tomorrow, folks. And this is the story right now. Gaza, yes, of course, ceasefire talk. Folks, Lebanon, Hezbollah. This is the big story in the region that everyone who knows is really talking about. That's the big one. And it's coming. And Iran is the puppet master pulling the strings. And we have U.S. officials saying that there's a good chance Iran would throw its hat in the ring directly if Israel goes to a major war with Hezbollah. It was April 13th when Iran, for the first time ever, launched over 300 projectiles from Iranian soil. Was that a preview of things to come if the north flares up? Remember, Hezbollah, one of the pawns on the chessboard in that ring of fire. Hamas was a big one. Hamas will never be the same after this. No matter what happens, Hamas, they'll never build up to where they were, I don't believe, again, after this. But it's one thing for Hamas to be taken off the board, but Hezbollah, that is Iran's crown jewel. And if Iran sees Hezbollah in its death throes, good chance the Iranian regime would directly intervene. We'll talk about all this a little bit more tomorrow. Good stuff. Folks, thanks so much for joining us. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.